Hi everyone. Yeah, we want to take you today through our journey from knowing nothing about web components, nothing about Polymer, to deploying it in production on our site, on a global big site, all within the space of about 4 or 5 months, and everything that we had to go through along the way. So this is us. My name is Matt. With me is David and Robin, hiding. Myself and Robin are developers on the Net-a-Porter front-end tech team. David is our designer. Don't mind. And yeah, so we are from Net-a-Porter. For those of you that don't know Net-a-Porter, we are a fairly large online luxury fashion retailer. Typically, our customer base and demographic for these talks don't really cross over much, so I'll let you off if you hadn't heard of us. Right, cool. Thanks to you, David.
Okay, so the guys approached me and asked to do just a little forward because, as the introduction was right, this is in the wild, and actually, what we found is a precursor to working with these components and Polymer is actually creating a culture of thinking around at a component level. So in that. This started with a move for us to move to cross-competency teams, so creating small product-focused teams that had a product owner, some engineers, some testers, and some experienced designers. By creating those small product-focused teams, it's really one of the most crucial points because what it did is it built empathy for someone else's problems in that team. We tackled problems as a whole team rather than an individual, and having a conversation between a designer and a developer was far more constructive than a designer to a designer trying to hypothesize what a developer might do. That empathy, as it establishes itself, it grew and it created a culture of learning and listening, and that self-development allowed us to pivot through ideas. So all the way through this journey, this wasn't a smooth process. There was a lot of kind of self-reflection and kind of how do we make this work? Oh, there's a problem here. How do we change it? And that kind of that was built on a base of empathy. A problem for Matt was a problem for me. So that's for me one of the most crucial points of this whole sort of bringing components into the wild for us. Needless to say, these smaller teams also kind of they promote self-development through their conversation, and that becomes a natural catalyst. And a catalyst for us was the way we changed our approach to talking to our stakeholders and approaching design. So previously, our process was about showcasing fully formed pages at the end of 2-week sprints, pretty much resulting in a lot of subjective commentary from our stakeholders, but also constant rework. So one stakeholder would want a form field like interacting this way, another one on a registration page would want it acting another way. And it was really hard to construct a global language that would actually work for us. Eventually, this was derailing us as a team and our ability to actually deliver projects. So, something had to change for us as a team to be able to deliver business value. And what we decided to do was take a step back and start talking about things to our stakeholders at a more granular level. So taking the page design out of it, taking the kind of the hybrid functionality away from it, and talking to them at a base level about what this component is, what that component is. So we used quite a popular methodology coined by Brad Frost a couple of years ago, which is called atomic design. And what you'll see is this kind of flows through the thinking into working with web components. So basically what you'll see here is an atom is a finite element, so maybe an H1 or an H2 or something that can't be broken down any smaller. And then you have a molecule, that's a collection of these atoms, so maybe a language select or a form field. And then an organism grows to a whole form on a page. So our showcases became less about page designs and more about style sheets like this. So really talking at them at a granular level, getting them invested in that idea of components. So when they kind of saw these and we spoke about them, we had those conversations and we agreed that this was the way forward, we could have that global understanding that this is always an H1. And this is always how a form field interacts. And then we could go back and build those pages and actually get proper throughput. So what it meant for us is that the stakeholders, the team, the ability to develop, we're all invested with the same culture of thinking at this component level. So the thinking was there, and then I'm going to let these guys go through the technical stuff now, but Matt will take you through like what the real turning point was for us.
Thanks. So this whole idea of like designing on a modular level, on a component level, is not really new, I wouldn't say, to like the wider community or to us. We tried it before in a few ways. We've gone for played around with like a Twitter bootstrap approach. Tried a bit of like the Smacks approach. Even tried like SAS and less like mix-ins, all in a way to try and create reusable things and drop them in anywhere. The issue we had is that our entire stack is made up of like lots of microservices, even multiple microservices that like run the front end for us. So sharing these across all of those apps, all of those services, never really worked. It was never easy to work with, and therefore it just didn't get maintained. So, like tech-wise, for us, the real turning point came back in May. So I was over at Google I/O in San Francisco, where the Polymer team announced their 1.0 version of Polymer. So like production ready to go, like slimmed down, really performant. And I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of Polymer before this, even in its like early stages. But I heard of it, didn't really know what it did. So I came back from I/O. I started playing around with it. I thought this is great for what we were doing at the time. Put a few prototypes together, a few basic components, nothing flash, but they worked. They seemed easy enough to get going with. And yeah, so then we thought, okay, we've got some nice prototypes. Can we, on a large site, just throw this straight into production? Thanks. And the answer was kind of, maybe not. This is, you've probably all seen Can I Use. This is an amalgamation of the 4 things needed for web components. So you've got your shadow DOM, your HTML imports, your custom elements, and your templates. This was taken just last week, in fact, when we were doing these slides. It was probably even worse back in May when I was playing around with this. A bit risky, do we go ahead with this? Yeah, so it all comes down to, like, we knew the risks. There was a lack of browser support out there. So then it came down to what were the benefits of this? Do the payoffs outweigh the risks? And for us, the benefits were, this was like, we knew this was like a W3 standard. It's coming to the web, all web platforms, or at least we now know that. And the polyfill itself is soon, maybe a year or so down the line, not going to be needed everywhere. Also, this kind of felt like web dev. I mean, you're using HTML, you're using JavaScript, you're using CSS, and aside from like integrating it with like a library like Polymer, you don't really need to know like anything else in terms of like new technologies, new languages. So we thought this is a really, or at least a fairly easy way to get like new developers who are used to doing web development stuff, like get them on board with the whole components idea. So yeah, we also noticed like once we got a few basic components going, like delivery rate was like really good. So this is like a very like supposed diagram of like what delivery might be over the course of a standard project, not using components. Like you get, as time goes on, you get a bit more used to what you're doing, a bit more used to your project, your app. Delivery rate goes up a bit. Introduce components into that, and you've got a bit more upfront investment. You've got to create all these, granular things. But then once they're all there, and once you can just like drop them in, plug and play, delivery time is going to go like through the roof. And that was what we genuinely found as we were using them. So we went for it. And I'm going to hand over to Robin, who's going to talk about some of the stuff and showcase some of the stuff we actually built.
So I'm going to go over kind of, David talked about like atom, molecule, organism. Yeah. And I want to kind of show you that in a kind of granular level of some components we built from really small level all the way up. So this component is called NAP product price. And you can't get more simple than this, right? It's just a price. So it looks a bit weird if you do markup, because you're stringifying a JSON object into an attribute, which is a bit weird, but that's how it works. So why bother, right? A price, it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. E-commerce site, prices everywhere, and it is boring to do, right? I've done it now, I never have to do it again. So that's kind of the principle. But then this is just a molecule, right? So we can go on to, this is NAP product, which is an extension of that. So here's a basic product, okay? We've got product image, designer, description, and price. Again here, this is just the markup, chuck in an object, but as David's showing here, the actual interaction is all hidden behind here, right? So next time I need to do one, I don't need to write an event listener or anything, it's just built into the component. So I just drop this in, little object I drop in, and it's there. So this is then, I suppose, an atom. And then if we go to the next one, oh, sorry. So this is, so previously it just showed the code that you would drop in. This is what web dev tools would show you. So this is the shadow DOM being kind of injected into the page. And again, David. And then here you can see, here's the shadow DOM, and inside here it's put NAP product price, because that's its own component inside product. We go again. So this is then maybe an organism, right? So this is now multiple NAP products with prices, all self-contained together, and they all interact together. And this is what we call an upsell. So it's just NAP product upsell, and you pass it PIDs. So PIDs is our product ID. So it's just a collection of IDs inside an array. But that's pretty weird, right? How's all this data coming from that? It's just an ID. So Matt's going to go into more detail.
Thanks. So like Robin showed, you can build up from a really small level all of these components. You start really small, you build up and build up and build up, and all of a sudden you've got these really complex things that are completely self-contained. Here we've got what we call like our how to wear it module. This is like if you've got a particular product, this is all the ways you can style it, all the outfits you can show, and each has got its own upsell. Yeah, I guess it makes sense if you understand fashion. If you move on, all you need for that, to drop that in a page, is that little bit of markup. In fact, all we're passing to that is one product ID, so one PID, as we call it. But that is obviously not enough. Like, one number is not enough to render all of that data. So what's going on under the hood is we're using Polymer's Iron Ajax component, which some of you might be aware of. It's a really basic component that you can use to make an Ajax call to an API to get some data. So in this case, we've got like a public recommendations API. So we use an Iron Ajax to get all the outfits associated with a certain product. And then for each outfit, we use the upsell module itself, uses another Iron Ajax component to go to our public product API to get product data to enrich everything needed for that upsell at the bottom. That's really cool. You can, using all these little components, you drop them in, and then you can build up these really nice big modules. Please. So here's something slightly similar. This is kind of as close as we're going to get to a live demo as you can. This is what we call NAP Live. Again, it's using like an upsell module, which happens to have like a built-in carousel feature if there's too many products. And that's all the markup you need. This is, rather than just getting data once, this is actually like getting constant updates about what's going on the site. And this is not a video. This is like actually happening right now. This sits on our homepage. It's like a cool little feature. We really like it. Interestingly, this was this one day just broke, I think, didn't it? And we'd already started creating these components, so we're like, ooh, we could just completely redo this with Polymer components. Took like a morning to just create that. It's really, really cool. So something a bit different. David talks about like designing from a component level. We've done what I guess a few people might do with components. A really basic like form library. So really basic like component wrappers around like traditional HTML form components. But the interesting thing here is that we're using something in Polymer that Polymer uses called behaviors. And these kind of like allow you to share like both styles and functionality across components. So normally you talk about components in like a very encapsulated way. They've all got their own functionality built in. But if you want to share functionality, such as like the little animation of the label, the validation, and the styling in this example, like you can still write that once and once only. Also interestingly here, this country dropdown is again using an iron Ajax to hit our like centralized country data endpoint. And on a big e-commerce site, like a country dropdown is going to be used in quite a few places. So you drop that in. If the country data ever changes, you change it in the central API, changes across the whole site. You don't have to touch the component. It's a really nice scalable way of deploying this. Another little example I quite like, because it's slick and I made it. We've created like Net-a-Porter styled buttons, very basic, and then on top of that we've extended them a couple to do very specific bits of functionality. In this case, on a product page, you can add a product to your wish list. Entirely contained within that button, you've got the ability to pick which wish list. It knows which APIs to call, gives you like a little loading state, successful state. You can also create a new wish list all from here. This is like one of our inputs just built in, so we didn't have to redo that again. All that little animation was for free. And yeah, as your wish list, the new list is in there. Quite nice. And I think that's all of them for now. So great. So we've got our elements, and we want to make sure they work. Now I've talked a bit to various people about testing in the past, and not everyone's quite on board. But I want to make it really clear that it's quite easy to like make sure your components are really stable and testable. And they have to be, because I think of like components as having their own little API. Like you drop that wish list button on the page, and to interact with it, you kind of have to provide an API. Like you don't want to worry about what's going on under the hood. So in the button itself, you write some methods to interact with it, and you've got to make sure that those methods are always working. Because if you break it once, it's going to break across the entire site if you've got it scattered everywhere. So to test, the Polymer team have created a really nice tool called Web Component Tester. You might have played around with it. It's specifically designed for testing web components, and it allows you to write all your tests in HTML files. So if we're on the topic of writing components all in HTML, you can write your tests in HTML. All you do is simply drop your component into the body of the testing page, testing file, and then in a script tag you write all of your tests. And really nicely, this tool comes with like Mocha, Cinnamon, Chai, all the popular front-end testing tools and frameworks that, of course, you're all familiar with. Out the box, they're just ready to go. Yeah, a really, really nice tool. One issue we did find with it is that when you're in the process of like one unit test, you're normally messing around with an element's state, and most elements do seem to have state. So, for example, an input field, you want to test that. I don't know, you type in some text and you can get that text out as a value, something like that. But that means you've got to type some text in, and then for the next test, you've got text already built into your element. So you cleaning up and like tearing down is all a bit messy to do manually. So again, the Polymer team have created a little helper element called test fixture, and this is really easy to use, and it's specifically designed to tackle this problem. So to give a quick example, really short, snappy bit of code. If I want to test my wish list button here, all I do is wrap it in a template tag, drop it inside of this test fixture element, give it a little ID, and then in my test code, thanks. I use this little fixture helper, which is just like a Mocha extension. And when I call that, I do it in like before each test. That's going to take what I put in the template tag, stick it in the DOM for me, stamp it when it's ready, test is going to run, and then automatically in like after each stage of your test, it's going to rip it out the DOM and put a new one in, completely resetting the state for you for free. Really easy to use and makes it really, really easy and quite fun to test. Who thought that could happen? Cool. So we've got our tests. We can run them locally. Great. This is front-end stuff. So we need to make sure, especially because we've got patchy browser support on different platforms, we need to make sure that they work on all browsers, right? Even good old IE. So Source Labs is a third-party company. They're like a provider they're like a cloud service. They provide over 650 like OS platform device combinations of virtual machines that you can run your tests on. So we use them. We test across like Chrome, Safari, Firefox, IE. We're going to add Edge soon. Because they have that. And yeah, so all you do, for Web Component Tester, there's a really easy to use plugin. All you have to do is add a really small bit of configuration that basically tells it which browsers you want to test on, which browsers, which platforms. And then you plug into your CI job, and hey, presto, you've got a fully automated pipeline with tests. Great. So components, almost good to go.
So I want to talk about structured data, just because I think it's really cool and the way it sits with web components. I just rearranged these slides, so sorry if I have to keep checking back. OK, so yeah, I want to talk about structured data because I think it fits perfectly with Polymer. So if you don't know structured data, it's like metadata that kind of sits in your markup, and like Google can use it for rich snippets to identify what it is. So here's some example of the product component I showed you earlier. So this is marking up that it's a product. There's the product ID, there's the URL, it's got a brand, there's some more stuff in there. It's just telling you, like, OK, this is the type that it is. So this is our journey going through it. It was really difficult, and that's partly because there's a complete firewall around Google search, right? So any kind of questions, no, you're not allowed to know. And also, the tooling's just not kind of ready for testing it with Polymer components yet. So yeah, we started off thinking, yeah, we're really cool thinking of this, putting a component completely self-contained. You make a product, it inherits it everywhere. That sounds really cool. So if we can go, so now I get to hear my horrible whiny voice as well as you.
Hi, so we've done a lot of work on our components to follow the structured data model or SQL. So my question is, one, will those components, although we've tested them in Technical, will they actually be picked up as rich snippets? And the second part was, are you doing any work with elements for those kind of things like schema tags and social tags?
Yes, great question. Absolutely, and 100%. It will work. It will get picked up by browser or by search engines and shown as rich snippets.
Sorry, that was a bit smug of me as well. But that's me and Matt at Polymer Summit in Amsterdam. So yeah, 100% works. Right, we deployed it, and the first thing we saw was a collection of errors coming through. And I don't know, has anyone used Google Webmaster Tools just to kind of identify that kind of stuff? Yeah, so the first thing you can do if you get an error on like structured data is you can rerun the test. So you go here and you go, OK, there's an error on this one. I want to retest that. So you click retest. And that passes the URL of what you want to test to structured data tools, right? So here's an error. OK, yeah, I thought it was going to work, but there's an error. But what about this? I just pass in from DevTools the actual render DOM, how the browser sees it, and pass it through, and that passes. So why? Why does that happen? OK, so I need to see my notes here because this was really difficult. Structured data tool can understand the rendered DOM body. Structured data tool cannot render Polymer components because of a tooling problem, not because of Polymer components. But at the same time, the polyfill was not rendering the components quick enough for Googlebot to understand it. Does that all make sense? And then also, if you're doing stuff with like indexing, it takes days for you to get a feedback loop of, has my change done anything? Is Google indexing stuff? I don't know what's happening. So yeah, I had to call in the big guns and ask the Polymer team. So we asked the Polymer team. We met them at Amsterdam Polymer Summit, and we've got a quite good dev relations to them. So I asked them, what's going on? And they looked into it, and it was a bug in Web Components Lite, which they put a fix in for us, or so we hoped. but you have to wait a few days to know because that's the index. So a few days went past, and our error rates dropped off, and structured data come straight back up. So that was amazing. We can't thank the Google team enough because they were amazing. So kind of give us a little bit of an idea. What can we do with this structured data tool, right? So if you've used it, if anyone used it, you can see it's kind of like single-page app. So if you look at your XHR request, you can kind of see like you're posting some data and you're getting some JSON back. That's interesting. So put it into Postman. Can I call that from another domain? That'd be pretty cool. So what we did with that is we made a CI SEO testing. So all our components, as they go through CI, get the DOM, pass it to structured data tool, get the response back, and then we pass it for errors. And then we know that our SEO tool works. So on pipeline, all our components go through this, which is maybe the thing I'm most proud about. OK, so we talked about testing. We need to get it to production, so production FI. So the way you think about, I guess before HTTP2 kind of comes available, you kind of concatenate, minify, uglify all your scripts and whatever. Same kind of principle with Polymer components. And Polymer uses a tool called Vulcanize, which basically collects your component, squashes it, takes out comments, minify. The same kind of principle with HTML import type files, right? And you can concatenate them together. So you can do this with CLI or programmatically with JavaScript or task runners, and everyone knows what's coming next, right? So grunt, gulp, broccoli. There's wrappers for all of them that you can use. I thought it'd be interesting to show you what we do. So we wrap components together and we call them bundles. So this is our global bundle. These are elements that we deem important enough to be on every single page. So Vulcanize goes in, squashes all these together, makes one file. We also have the idea of like components and bundles on a specific page level. So the product page is the big one that's using components for us now. So here these ones are just kind of related to product pages at the moment, not anywhere else. So we just squash these into their own HTML file, and that goes with the product page. So then we need to kind of get that from our repo into our microservice applications. So for that, we use Bower. I know that people have a bit of a poo-poo against Bower now, but it's what Google are using for HTML imports, so we thought we'd kind of follow the same route. So what we do is we package them up into a distribution file. You can require that through your JSON package, and then you've got your distribution, and then the application will hash map it for you, so you've got good caching strategy, so you can keep it performant. A couple of other tools. So there's hydrolysis, which is static analysis. That will give you like documents about the API. It's what if you use Polymer elements, that's how they create their API documentation. CRISPR is CSP security. Polyserve is like how you might demo your, so if you want to work with your tools, it's how you demo your components. We started before Polyserve was out, so we actually wrote our own Node Express one, but we'll probably move towards Polyserve. Polylint, linter. Polydev is a Chrome dev extension, which will allow you to do some kind of performance benchmarks where it's spending its time, usually in ifs and loops.
Thanks. Great. So we're built. We're ready for production. We're getting really close to like launching all of these, and we're getting excited, but we're also getting a little bit nervous. Like, what if it all goes wrong? What if we put it out in the wild and it doesn't work? And like, you know, you do some normal web devy stuff, test it on a few browsers, you think, yeah, that's going to be fine. Chuck it out. It'll be fine on all browsers. What if this isn't? We're like relying on a new library. And yeah, and if something goes wrong, like our entire components are just not going to render. Like, it's not just going to be like a weird styling bug. They're just going to not appear at all. So I kind of like repurposed a bit of code that Eric Beidelman, one of the guys on the Polymer team, put up on GitHub and made it like production-y ready. You don't have to really like read exactly what's going on here. Essentially, this runs on all of our pages. It basically gets all of your HTML imports, and then for each one, it gets all of the DOM modules that are like in there. So basically, all of your custom elements that you've defined, and then for each of your custom elements, it's looking for any of those elements on the page. So basically checking every custom element on the page. And then it looks at its constructor. And what Polymer will do to an elements constructor is like upgrade it to a Polymer constructor. So we say, if it hasn't been upgraded, if it's still a plain old HTML element constructor, panic, do stuff. And in our case, do stuff is make a note of what the element is, make a note of what page you're on, and send all that to Google Analytics. And you get, hey, nice little dashboard of like how often this is going wrong. And yes, it does go wrong. Not enough for us to like panic when we launched. This is like when we launched. There's just no monitoring in place before then. We didn't release a bug or anything. I don't know, maybe we did. But yeah, so actually this does go wrong. And yes, this gave us like a really nice dashboard of like easy to spot errors. Like we were able to filter by component type or browser or page to try and really work out what's going on. And we're still trying to work out what's going on, so I don't have an answer as to why this happens yet. Stay posted. Cool, so it's out in the wild. Before we wrap up, I want to just kind of like go over a little few miscellaneous little pitfalls that we ran into, few peculiarities. First one, and this is a really, really quick one. The Polymer documentation, really, really good in general. But sometimes, if you're browsing around, hit one of these pages trying to like find the answer to a question, you completely miss this guy. Now, we were using Polymer 1.0, and at the time that was brand new, so all of the docs were 0.5, completely incompatible with each other. Always look out for this. Becomes even trickier if you're like browsing around on Stack Overflow where you don't even get a little label. But yeah, take note. Right, this was my favorite, and by which I mean it almost killed me. Good old cause. Every web developer's favorite issue. Now we import all of our HTML imports, all of our components from like a subdomain that's like configured to be like optimized for asset delivery, which means we need cause headers. Turns out on Safari, HTML imports aren't considered important enough to, like, they don't have to be imported on the same origin. So Safari will import them from anywhere, which means it doesn't send a origin header, which means cross-origin headers don't come back. And when you're running in such a big environment like ours, we have a big CDN layer around everything that caches everything for us across the globe. Those resources are being cached in our CDN without our cause headers, which meant when you come to using your pages on Firefox, on Chrome, where the same origin policy does apply to HTML imports, we were seeing loads of like cause scripting errors in the console, and the browser was refusing to import them for us, and everything was breaking. That took us like over a week and collaboration with our CDM guys to work out and fix. Just thought I'd let you know. No one else needs to go through that. And a good old talk on web dev wouldn't be complete without talking about issues with IE. So, IE has a couple of elements. The two I found, table and select, where if you try putting something inside a select that's not an option, it doesn't like it. And actually, this is only IE 11, if I remember correctly. So this is something, go back. This is something like completely normal that we were trying to pull off in a component. So if you don't understand the syntax, fine. This is like, it's basically a loop. So you've got a DOM repeat. This says loop over your data set, which is options here. And for each one, create an option tag. Works fine across pretty much every browser, except for IE. IE says, if you put something in a select element that's not an option, I ain't having none of it. Yoinks it out, puts it, basically renders it like that, as a, kind of like yoinks it out as a sibling element, which just renders like an empty dropdown, completely useless. So hopefully the Polymer guys have put a little bit of syntactic sugar on option tags and other tags to get around this, and you can just use a little template attribute and this little cool repeat thing, and that gets around that for you. Yeah, so just a few little pain in the bums. Cool, right.
Cheers. Okay, so that's kind of us wrapping up, but I thought I'd show you or talk to you about what we're going to do next or what we want to try and do next. Conditional polyfill, right? I'm going to have to to my notes again. Sorry. So at the moment we load the polyfill for everyone, but there's no point for Chrome, right? Because it's fully supported, which means in Chrome you're using Shady DOM as opposed to Shadow DOM, which is actually a little bit slower. So we'd like to conditionally load that and probably further up the page just for, I know it sounds ugly, but it helps you do the rest. But that gets more complicated. Sorry, David. That gets more complicated as each of the new vendors add support, right? So your polyfill has to change. You maybe have to do like more conditional stuff. So we know now Safari's in nightly, IE's on its way, and Firefox is behind the flag. So Shadow DOM's coming soon, which is the hardest thing to polyfill. Next. Performance monitoring. So Matt talked about, does it work? But we don't really know like how well is it working. So we need to increase like real user metrics about how quick it's taking to render, how long the assets are taking to come down. We also want to put in like monitoring of memory usage on components, because we want to know how well it's working on devices. We're not hogging resource. Optimize the build. So I talked about previously that we kind of built our own demo thing. So we'd now like to move to Polyserve just to get the synergy with the Google team. And we'd also like to move each element into its own repo. At the moment, they're kind of in one. And we'd like to do that to version better. Skeleton CSS and unresolved styles. So anyone who kind of looks at performance stuff knows about skeleton CSS of like bootstrapping your page and then adding content in later. It's really important with Polymer because you can have this issue about it bootstrapping and looking a bit ugly. So we'd like to do that, and unresolved style is something that Polymer gives you to help you achieve this. And then progressive enhancement. Did anyone watch the Chrome Dev Tools this week? Dev Summit? Cool. Okay, so Paul Lewis talked about progressive enhancement. It's all about progressive apps. And one of them was, from last night, was this slide, which talks about how to do a Polymer. So I'm just going to walk you through it. So this is like your skeleton styles, load your CSS in line at the top. This is the core application. The core application then async loads these HTML imports. HTML imports, by definition, can call the same one, and it's a race. So you won't load that 3 times, even though they're all referenced in it. It'll just get loaded once. So then that helps boot all this, and then goes to that. And that's like the optimum way to load Polymer components. That's something we want to look at, but haven't done yet. What was the last one? Okay, expanding on the product page. So most of this is now contained in the product page. There's a little bit on the home page. Coming soon, there's a new basket, which is going to have a little upsell at the bottom. But it's mainly here. So we want to spend a bit more time investing in Polymer and then taking it outside the product page and distributing it through the site. We're looking at listing pages next, and that's kind of our next goal. But there's some performance stuff we want to improve, and just improve what we've got so far. So I can go through some resources I think you might find handy. So Chrome Dev Summit was this week, and these were the 2 Polymer talks. Polymer State of the Nation, which if you watch is a bit of a plug from us. But it's worth watching because they talk about what's coming. And Building Progressive Web Apps by Rob Dobson is all about building Polymer components and progressive apps. Useful links, Google Docs, use 1.0, not 0.5. Element Catalog is like all the Polymer elements they've pre-built for you. These are like Iron Ajax that we've talked about, but it goes from small to large. Really good stuff. There's a Polymer Slack channel where we are and the Polymer team, you can ask them questions. Polycast on YouTube are tutorials by Rob Dobson, awesome. And the web components site for just any what's going on, right? These are some maybe useful Twitter links of Polymer one, obviously. Eric Biderman, Rob Dobson, Taylor Savage, they all work on the Polymer team. Great to ask questions, we'll get back to you, and just follow them because they'll tell you what's happening in the web component world.